What mental health services are there for young people in Suffolk?
I think the mental health services, generally speaking, are not great in Suffolk and Norfolk. So we have a trust. I think it does the best that it can with the money it's got. I don't think there's enough money going into mental health services. So I was in charge of adult social care for 4 years. I saw many safeguarding cases, particularly around young people as they transitioned into adulthood. And I don't think, generally speaking, that there is enough service, but what I really mean by that is I don't think there is enough money. Because people say, well, how could we sometimes, it is actually about money. It is actually about the amount of money going into something. So I'd like to see more money going into those services. And as a counsellor, I don't design services. A counsellor is pretty much about, this is an area I want to focus on, this is the resource we'll put into it. And we don't control the resources that go into mental health services. But all I know is when I look at it, and I've dealt with 3 different chairmen of the Mental Health Trust and 3 different chief executives, and for all the things they try and do, they're always, the biggest single problem is there's not enough money going into the service.
Regardless of where the funding is, would you expect young people with mental health problems to wait half a year to be referred to the right place?
Well, it seems to me if you've got mental health problems, it's about a timely intervention that helps people address things and actually get things sorted out. So I know more about adult mental health than I do about young people's mental health, but the same thing applies, and that comes down to the money again. It comes down to the resources, that if you put enough money across the service, then you don't have massive waiting lists and people can be seen in a timely fashion. It seems to me that if a young person goes into a doctor's surgery and says that they're having a problem, then it seems to me that a referral within a week or 2 weeks is the sort of standard we should be seeing. But I know for a fact that isn't there, and I know for a fact that isn't what happens a lot of the time, and yet it happens in some places and not others. So there's a sort of patchy aspect to it as well, which I think is wrong in how it's delivered.
Do you know whether the funding for CAMS services in Suffolk has been increased or decreased recently?
I think there is a little bit more money. The last meeting I had was when I was in a previous role, when I was doing adult social services, and I knew there was a little bit more money being put into the service then. I have to say, I don't know what's happened in the last year and a bit on that. So I'm not aware of that. That's something I could find out, actually. That's something I should find out. Ryan, can we make sure we find that out? Yeah.
Moving on to yourself as a leader, what will you be doing differently to Mark B?
Oh, what will I be doing differently to Mark B? Well, broadly speaking, we're a group. So when I put up all those charts, we're a Conservative group. We set out a strategy when we took power in 2013, which was not to put the council tax up over 4 years, to be focused on protecting vulnerable people, and that all continues. So in the context that I'm a new leader and different from Mark, not really, because under the previous administration I was in charge of adult social care, and when we won in 2013, Mark made me in charge of finance. So in reality, whilst there was a period, my sort of wilderness year, the reality of it is, the policies we pursue, there isn't much between Mark's opinion and my own opinion. What I do believe in is I do believe probably in talking more to people. So I'm ratcheting up the We Are listening. So I've instigated this thing where I go out every other week and stand in a market square and talk to people. I'm bringing in the webcasting of meetings. I'm bringing in Facebook discussion groups. And I want us to be a much more engaged council. So we had a strategy called the Suffolk 1000, which was about 1,000 people get involved in a focus group, and I'd like young people to be involved in that as well. I want that to be the Suffolk 10,000. So I want there to be much more engagement with people, so that people, when we make decisions and they see the decision made, they've actually got the ability to see how we made that decision. Because I think it's incredibly important that people understand that there is a sort of thing about people engaging, because people generally don't engage. But I want the decision making not to come as a shock, but to be the end of a process where we've discussed it. The problem is, the second we go out and start discussing, everybody thinks we've made the mind up. And I am trying to message to people, when we come and ask you something, no, that's because we haven't made our mind up, not because we have. And that's a challenge.
Do you think that measures such as introducing social media to the work of the council will make the content of the meetings more engaging with young people?
I hope so. That's certainly my aim. It does require young people to get more engaged themselves. You can't just be passive receivers of stuff. You have to then actually respond to it. And if we're on Facebook in a way we've never been, or on Twitter, you've got the ability to actually interact with that. So we think that's incredibly important that young people do get involved in that. But at the moment, short of putting it on parchment and giving it to a carrier pigeon, it's not the easiest thing to interact with. So yes, we have email, but we recognise that actually you need to have a lot of different ways of engaging with people, and particularly with young people.
Okay, moving on to another youth parliament campaign, the living wage, or as we've adapted it in Suffolk, the minimum wage.
Yep.
Is it fair that young people in Suffolk can be paid considerably less than an adult doing exactly the same job as them?
Well, you come into a whole range of different things. It's, I think, my opinion is that yes, it is. I do. I think young people have to learn a role, they have to get involved in a role. Apprenticeship is a really interesting thing. There are some apprenticeships out there that pay remarkable amounts of money. So I was at Sizewell B the week before last, and they were telling me about their apprenticeship programme, and that their apprenticeships get paid something like £30,000 a year. And they're not allowed there for the first 2 years of their apprenticeship. They're sent somewhere else to learn the industry, because you can't muck about in a nuclear power station. So the reality is that I think it is important that young people get to learn a trade, get to learn how to do something. I'm perfectly accept they're probably doing exactly the same job, but I do agree with that, and I do agree with the living wage, and I do agree with what the government is doing in terms of the living wage. But there are consequences with it. So in Suffolk, we've already mapped that we think next year it will cost us £6.7 million more to deliver services than it would previously. So we're having a conversation with government about, and how exactly do we pay for that? Because all things have to be paid for in the end.
Do you support organisations such as the Living Wage Foundation in their work?
For me personally, I am particularly focused around employment. We as a county council pay the living wage. So we adopted that as a policy. We did not require our providers to adopt it. We said that you are a provider, you will adopt the policy that you wish, so it's minimum wage or plus. Government has now stepped into the space. It's made it very, very plain what it wants to see the living wage to be, and I fully support that.
Do you reckon we're currently placing too much emphasis on gaining a degree or academic qualification over a vocational qualification?
Yes, I do actually. It's really interesting. I had a meeting with Richard Lister, who's in charge of University Campus Suffolk, the other day, and we were talking about that. We were talking about skill sets, and then when you go to places like Germany, they value vocational training as much as they value academic, and Germany is more successful than us, so therefore I don't think it's rocket science to say that actually there needs to be, I think they need to have fairly equal status. And I come from the building trade, and I can show you brickies and plumbers who are considerably out-earn anybody with a degree. So I live in an industry where a trade is an incredibly powerful thing.
And finally, Vote to 16, an issue I'm certainly passionate about. Looking back at the Scottish independence referendum last year, did it show that young people aged 16 and 17 are mature and engaged enough to have the vote across the whole of the UK?
Not a clue whether it showed that. What I do know is if you want politicians to be more engaged with young people, give them the vote will certainly focus the mind. And I actually think that would be a good thing. And I think if you did it, politicians would pay more attention, frankly. I try to, but I think politicians would. So I would be in favour of it.
You're one of the few Conservatives that do then?
Yeah, but then as I say, we don't all think the same, so...
You're trying to implement policies like webcasting to try and get people like us involved.
Yeah.
How are you going to get councillors, as your leader of the council now, how are you going to get councillors to adopt your thinking and engage us, perhaps by considering extending the franchise or opening their minds to that idea?
Well, surely, Ryan, I just issue a diktat and everybody obeys, don't they? Isn't that how it works? That's how it works. No, maybe not. It's called leadership. You show people how to do things. You make sure there's enough training and support. So in terms of IT, so we're switching from ancient Blackberries to far more modern phones so people can access the apps, which you can't on Blackberries. So there's a facilitation aspect to it, which I think is incredibly important. Demonstrating that it's not as scary as people think. So if you've never used Twitter, and you're suddenly faced with it for the first time. And politicians spend their life getting in trouble because you can send 1,000 good tweets, one bad tweet, and that's all that people remember. So a lot of politicians shy away from it, a lot of councillors shy away from it. One of the things I do for Conservative groups is I will go anywhere in East Anglia and I will give half an hour on social media, what it means. I'll talk about some of the upsides, some of the downsides, what trolls, what bullying means in terms of how that affects councillors, because we do get bullied. I occasionally get bullied on various social media things. It's part and parcel of it for councillors. And I talk about how you are perceived as being more open, more accessible, and that's important for a politician to be, because you, as I say earlier, you're meant to listen. And I think it's just about showing people that it's out there, showing people how to use it, taking people on a journey of it, because as I say, generally councillors tend to be a little bit older and they tend not to be as social media savvy, I think. And what you're trying to show people is how you can do it and how that benefits. It's not just about doing it, it's not just about how do you get into Twitter, how do you send a tweet. That's slightly irrelevant. It's what you're trying to do with it. So I was an instigator through another body I sit on called the East of England LGA, not to be confused with the National LGA, and I sit on their innovation panel, and myself and its chairman commissioned Public Eye, which is a social media outfit from Brighton, and they've designed something called the Network Councillor. And it's a programme that you can buy in as a council, and it takes councillors through social media, it creates buddies, it brings officers in to work with councillors, and it's designed specifically to lift it from this is Twitter and this is how you send a tweet, to the theory of how you publicly engage with people and young people in a different way.
And finally, do you want the government to give in and support votes at 16 in the EU referendum?
Oh yes, the EU referendum and votes for 16. That's going to be a really interesting debate as to part of what they're doing. I don't think they will. Generally, that's
do you want them
not
to?
The impression. I said earlier I supported votes for 16. So if I support vote for 16 in council and national elections, then I pretty much better support 16. I think there is a general thing about responsibility. I think we would all hope that in giving anybody the vote, that there is a genuine attempt to actually engage in the subject at hand. Doesn't always happen with over 18. So, but there is that point, and I do get that argument from government, and I do understand what's being said there. But as I say, I support votes for 16 and over. Therefore, I support it in an EU referendum as well.
Colin Noble, thank you very much.
Pleasure. Thanks.